The Haunting of Willow Farm. Chapter 1. The Move. The Smith family had finally found their dream home, a beautiful farmhouse with a large backyard and plenty of space for their children to play. They were thrilled when the previous owners accepted their offer and they began making plans for the move. As they unpacked and settled into their new home, strange things began to happen. Doors would slam shut on their own, the family dog barked at empty spaces, and the children claimed they could hear whispers coming from the walls. At first, the family tried to ignore these strange occurrences, thinking it was just their imagination getting the better of them. But the events continued to escalate, becoming more frequent and terrifying. One night, the family woke up to find their furniture had been moved around, and their belongings had been thrown all over the place. As the days went on, the family began to fear for their safety. They knew they needed to seek help, but didn't know who to turn to. It was then that they met a local priest who offered to help them investigate the strange occurrences in their home. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a nightmarish ordeal that would test their faith and strength in ways they never imagined possible. Chapter 2. The Haunting begins. The family had just finished moving into the farmhouse, but something didn't feel right. It started with small things like objects moving on their own, unexplained noises, and a strange feeling of being watched. But soon, things took a turn for the worse. The family would hear whispers in the night and feel cold spots in the house. One night, the family was awakened by the sound of a door slamming shut. The father got up to investigate, but found nothing out of the ordinary. He shrugged it off, thinking it must have been the wind, but he couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The next morning, the mother found that some of her jewelry was missing. The family searched the entire house but couldn't find it anywhere. That's when they began to suspect that there was something more going on in the house than they had first thought. As the days went by, the haunting became more intense. The family started experiencing nightmares, and they began to see apparitions in the house. They were scared and didn't know what to do. One night, the youngest daughter claimed that she saw a woman in a white dress standing at the end of her bed. The family was terrified, and they decided that they needed to seek help. Chapter 3. The Investigation. As the strange occurrences around the farmhouse continued to escalate, the family realized they needed help. They contacted the local priest, Father Thomas, who agreed to come and investigate. Upon arrival, Father Thomas immediately sensed a malevolent presence. He walked around the house, blessing each room and trying to detect any signs of spiritual activity. He also interviewed each member of the family to get a sense of what they had experienced so far. The family recounted their various experiences, from hearing strange noises in the middle of the night to seeing shadowy figures moving through the house. Father Thomas took notes and listened carefully, trying to piece together what was happening. As he continued his investigation, Father Thomas discovered that the farmhouse had a dark past. It had been the site of several gruesome murders, and some locals even claimed it was cursed. Father Thomas realized that the family was not simply dealing with a haunted house, but with something far more sinister. He decided to conduct a séance to try and communicate with the spirits in the house, hoping to learn more about what was going on. The family agreed to participate, but they were all terrified of what they might encounter. Chapter 4. The Priest. As the strange events in the farmhouse continued to escalate, the family knew they needed help. They contacted a local priest, Father Daniel, who was known for his expertise in exorcisms and dealing with the paranormal. Father Daniel arrived at the farmhouse and immediately began his investigation. He spent hours talking with the family and gathering information about the strange occurrences. He performed various rituals and prayers to determine the nature of the spectral menace that was causing the haunting. After several days of investigation, Father Daniel determined that the farmhouse was indeed haunted by a malevolent spirit. He warned the family that the spirit was powerful and that it would take all of his skills and spiritual strength to defeat it. The family was relieved to finally have some answers, but they were also terrified to know that they were dealing with something that was beyond their understanding. They clung to Father Daniel's every word, hoping that he would be able to rid their home of the haunting once and for all. Chapter 5. The Séance. The family had called in a local medium for help. The woman arrived, introduced herself as Maria, and started setting up for the séance. She lit candles and incense, then asked the family to hold hands around the table. The mood was tense as they waited for something to happen. At first, there was only silence, and the family began to feel foolish for wasting their time. But then, the temperature in the room dropped, and they could see their breath in the air. A cold wind swept through the room, and the candles flickered. Maria started to sway in her chair, and her voice changed, becoming deeper and rougher. The family looked at each other, terrified, as Maria spoke in a voice that was not her own. She claimed to be a spirit from the farmhouse, one that had been trapped there for centuries. The family asked what the spirit wanted, and it replied that it wanted revenge for being wronged. The family felt a sense of dread wash over them as the spirit spoke, and they realized that they were dealing with something far more powerful than they had ever imagined. They begged the spirit to leave them alone, but it refused, saying that it would not rest until it had its revenge. The séance ended with Maria passing out, and the family was left feeling even more helpless than before. Chapter 6: The Possession. As soon as the séance was over, the haunting in the farmhouse took a sharp turn for the worse. The family members were seeing strange apparitions, hearing odd noises, and even feeling a presence touching them at times. They were all too scared to sleep at night and constantly living in a state of panic. The priest had to visit the farmhouse frequently and try to calm the family down while continuing his investigation. He was beginning to feel that the supernatural presence in the house was getting more powerful with each passing day. He knew that he had to act quickly before things got out of hand. One night, while the family was having dinner, they all noticed that the room was getting colder by the second. Suddenly, they heard a loud banging sound from upstairs. The family members looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The priest immediately got up and took a crucifix out of his pocket. He instructed the family to stay put and went upstairs to investigate. As he walked up the stairs, he heard a voice whispering his name. When he reached the top of the stairs, he saw a dark figure standing in the hallway. The figure had glowing red eyes and looked like it was made out of smoke. The priest held out his crucifix and began to recite prayers, but the figure didn't budge. Suddenly, the figure moved towards the priest and entered his body. The priest screamed and fell to the ground, shaking uncontrollably. The family members rushed upstairs to find the priest lying on the floor, struggling to breathe. The family knew that the priest had been possessed by the malevolent spirit. They knew that they had to act quickly to save him, but they didn't know how. They all gathered around the priest, praying and hoping for a miracle. Fortunately, he was able to overcome evil with his strong spiritual strength. Chapter 7: The Exorcism. The priest, Father James, arrived at the farmhouse on a cold, foggy night. He was accompanied by 2 assistants, both of whom were experienced exorcists. The family was huddled in the living room, frightened by the events of the past few days. Father James began by blessing the room and invoking the power of God. He then performed a thorough examination of the house, looking for any signs of demonic activity. It didn't take long for him to find what he was looking for. In the attic, he discovered an old chest that contained several items of occult significance. Among them was a dusty book with strange symbols and a black candle. Father James knew that this was the source of the evil that had been tormenting the family. He immediately called his assistants to come up and help him perform an exorcism on the chest and its contents. They formed a circle around the chest, holding hands and chanting prayers. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew through the attic, knocking over the candle and extinguishing it. The book opened on its own, and the symbols inside began to glow with an eerie green light. Father James and his assistants knew that they were dealing with a powerful entity. They continued to recite their prayers and chants, but they could feel the evil energy building in the room. The possessed chest began to shake violently, and a demonic voice emerged from within, taunting and threatening the exorcists. But Father James and his assistants stood their ground, calling upon the power of God to banish the evil spirit. Finally, with one last prayer, the chest exploded in a burst of light, and the demonic energy dissipated. The room was quiet once again, and the exorcists knew that they had succeeded. The family was relieved and grateful to Father James and his team. They all knew that the farmhouse was no longer haunted and that they could finally live in peace. But Father James knew that he would always remember the night he faced the ultimate evil and emerged victorious. Chapter 8: The Showdown. On the day of the exorcism, the priest arrived early, before anyone else. He went around the farmhouse, checking all the rooms to make sure everything was in place for the ritual. The family and their friends arrived shortly after, and they all gathered in the living room. The priest began by explaining the ritual to everyone and what to expect. The family looked scared, but they were determined to get rid of the evil spirit that had been tormenting them. The priest started the exorcism, and everyone joined in with prayers and hymns. As they continued the ritual, the atmosphere in the room grew more intense. Suddenly, the lights went out, and the room was plunged into darkness. The family and their friends panicked, but the priest remained calm and continued the exorcism by candlelight. The exorcism lasted for hours, and the priest was exhausted, but he refused to give up. Finally, the spirit started to weaken, and the family could feel the presence of the evil entity fading away. They all breathed a sigh of relief as the exorcism came to an end. As they left the farmhouse, the priest warned the family that the spirit might try to return, but they were ready for it. They thanked the priest for his help, and he told them to call him if they needed him again. The family left, happy and relieved that the nightmare was over. The priest walked back into the farmhouse and went to the room where the exorcism had taken place. As he looked around the room, he felt a sudden chill run down his spine. He could feel that the spirit was still there, watching him. Suddenly, the room went cold, and a voice whispered in his ear, "You may have won this time, but I'll be back." The priest shuddered and quickly left the room. He knew that the spirit had not been defeated and that it would return one day. As he walked out of the farmhouse, he looked back at the building, and for a moment, he thought he saw a figure in the window, watching him. He knew then that the spirit was still there, waiting for its chance to return and seek its revenge. Chapter 9, The Victory. As the priest continued to perform the exorcism, the evil presence in the farmhouse grew stronger. The family huddled together, praying for a miracle. Suddenly, a bright light shone from the sky, illuminating the entire farmhouse. The priest continued to chant, his voice growing louder and more intense. As the light intensified, the presence began to weaken. The family could feel the evil energy slowly dissipating. Finally, with a loud burst of energy, the spirit was banished from the farmhouse. The priest breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that he had saved the family from certain doom. The family thanked the priest profusely, grateful for his bravery and spiritual strength. They knew that without him, they would have been lost to the darkness forever. The priest blessed the farmhouse, ensuring that it would remain safe from evil spirits for many years to come. As the family looked around, they knew that they had finally found a place to call home. Despite the horrors they had faced, they were stronger for it. They had faced their fears and emerged victorious, ready to face any challenge that lay ahead. As the priest prepared to leave, he turned to the family and said, "Remember, there is always light in the darkness. You must have faith and courage, and you will always find your way home."